We're talking about Niagara today, a 1953 Henry Hathaway film starring Marilyn Monroe. And it is a pretty interesting film. So, through my studies of Marilyn Monroe, which I think are really good, which I always have a lot of fun studying Marilyn Monroe and the films that she made, what strikes me as most interesting about Marilyn Monroe is that her appeal, her sexiness, her cinematic qualities, they are immediate. And what makes her so unique is that she seems so available as a screen icon. Like you feel as if you could reach out and touch her. And of course, those kinds of feelings lead to possibly negative ones of possessiveness on the part of the viewer. The viewer feels like they can possess this woman. And of course, that's partly objectifying, or maybe entirely objectifying, but also film is entirely objectifying. Film objectifies every single thing that it photographs. They become objects within a frame, or objects of the narrative, or objects of the atmosphere, of the cinematic. That's simply what film does. It's one of the possible drawbacks of film. Film objectifies everything that it photographs. And sometimes it ends up photographing people who have these kinds of transcendental qualities, the ones that Marilyn Monroe certainly exhibited. And what happens is the audience feel possessive of her. And they all have their own definition of her in their head. And it's one that's kind of tangible. It's one that's soft. It's one that has viscera to it. It's something that they feel. It's passionate, you know. And I think that in her greatest films, like Some Like It Hot or The Misfits or Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, I feel as if Marilyn Monroe is very immediate, very available, very there for the audience to interact with. I think that Marilyn Monroe's name is synonymous with cinema itself. I think partly the reason why cinema exists is to photograph Marilyn Monroe. That the reason that films and movies rose and came into popularity were to film people like Marilyn Monroe. Because people like Marilyn Monroe kind of harnessed the true power of what film can do, what film can compel from an audience, and that is possessiveness. But you get a great director like Billy Wilder, or in a film like Bus Stop, right? And Bus Stop is phenomenal. That's one of my favorite Marilyn Monroe films. Um, it makes you think that if you're going to possess Marilyn Monroe, you're going to have to possess her sadness as well. If you are going to possess beauty, you will have to possess the suffering of beauty, or the beauty of suffering. I think that Marilyn Monroe worked best in comedies, and I think she was a tragic comic icon and basically a genius comedian. Niagara Falls is a bit different. So I laid that down as the basis, as the starting point, as the foundation of our analysis for Niagara, because Henry Hathaway, who had worked with Marilyn Monroe before, approaches her differently. He approaches Marilyn Monroe as a distanced object, right? There's not that immediacy now. There's not that completely available sensation applied to her screen persona here. She is a distanced object and entirely mysterious. Now, Marilyn Monroe's natural persona was one of immediacy, of immediate sexiness and immediate passion and immediate possessiveness. So, what does something like adding a mysterious quality to that do to the viewer? It frustrates them. It frustrates them entirely because they feel like they know this woman and that they're being aggravated By the schemes of genre filmmaking, this is it's a thriller. By the schemes of genre filmmaking to be separated from what they desire most, which is intimacy with Marilyn Monroe, the screen idol. And that kind of makes the film really interesting. Uh, it's a partly fascinating work because just like the great works of Wilder, Some Like It Hot and The 7 Year Itch, and just like Bus Stop, and certainly just like The Misfits, you get lost in Marilyn Monroe, and with the added mysteriousness, you don't just possess her sexiness. If you want to possess her sexiness, then you have to possess suffering. In order to possess Marilyn Monroe's beauty, you have to also possess the beauty of suffering. And that's a fascinating accomplishment. And I think it's all due to Marilyn Monroe. Honestly, I think that she is the true artist here. And normally is the true artist everywhere. The directors really just have to figure out how to film her and to make sure she learns her lines and shows up on time. That's all the director has to do, which, by the way, is really difficult when it comes to Marilyn Monroe. But it was all worth it. It's fucking magic every time that a camera catches her. From every angle, she looks divine. And that's the thing about the divinity of screen idols, right? Because divinity doesn't actually exist. Divinity is fleeting. And that's what makes films so uniquely mesmerizing because they can crystallize divinity. And you can go back and watch films like Niagara and just bask in the glory of the goddess Marilyn Monroe. They can crystallize divinity, which isn't real, which is fine because film is all about illusions anyway, right? Marilyn Monroe is not her screen persona, but her screen persona is the legend, and the legend is what was printed. And the legend is the only thing that we can visit again and again. The legend was what was crystallized, the divinity is there forever. Joseph Cotton, I also feel, is very good in this film. He always adds this kind of masculine aura of dread to all of his work. I think he was kind of channeling his third man, Shadow of a Doubt, kind of earlier roles in this one. And Jean Peters, truly a thankless role, but I thought she was rather adequate in it. She allowed herself to be upstaged by Marilyn Monroe over and over again with a lot of understated grace. So those are always thankless roles, and I'm always my heart goes out to those actors who are really there just to kind of juxtapose with Marilyn's otherworldliness, which a thankless role, but I think she was rather good, rather adequate, more than serviceable. She was good. The film, I think the best part of the film is when Joseph Cotton and Marilyn Monroe play husband and wife, and Joseph Cotton is Loomis and Marilyn Monroe is Rose. Well, I guess the best part of the film is Marilyn wearing that pink dress and then torturing her husband with songs that will drive him jealous with psychopathic rage and self harm. She plays it on the record player and she goes out and like dances mischievously, and that pink dress, holy shit. Woo, sign me up for what? I don't know. I just lost my mind momentarily, but sign me up for whatever the fuck my stupid brain is doing when I see that dress. It sends me into a stupor. My God, it's great. The other best part of the movie is when Loomis is chasing Rose down through a cathedral, through these bells and everything, and beneath the bells, he strangles the life out of her. And we get this beautiful shot. I'm pretty impressed by Hathaway's composition. This beautiful shot of Rose's lifeless body there. And yes, the film does plummet and take a nosedive immediately after Marilyn Monroe's character is killed off. But that's fine. There's only like maybe 15 minutes after Marilyn Monroe is dead. But it's a pretty good movie. The movie likes to vibe a lot with Niagara, with the falls, right? And it likes to kind of play with this metaphor that romance is like the falls themselves. out of nowhere and very abruptly you can start to plummet to your death from a very still kind of serene rainbows everywhere that this water you can just start to plummet to your death. That's what love is. That's exactly what love is. But I think a postmodern take on the film, or at least a meta take on the film, is that like the falls are Marilyn herself, you know, just entirely self-destructive, extremely fatalistic, just moving and plummeting down. But the thing is, no one goes to Niagara Falls to see the still water at the top. No one goes there to see anything other than the waterfall, than the destruction, than the plummet, the long drop down with rainbows cascading from cliff to rock all across it. And that's much like Marilyn Monroe. I think of that part of the Misfits where she's staring at the camera from far away saying, "You just want to watch me die. All of you just want to watch me die." And no one goes to Niagara Falls to see anything other than the waterfall, than that vicious and violent clattering of nature. And that's what we see Marilyn Monroe films for. At least that's what the greater public did. Niagara is interesting. Even Pauline Kael. Pauline Kael said this isn't a good movie, and it's not a great movie, but I find a lot of things to enjoy about it. I've had a lot of positive experiences with the film. But Pauline Kael said it's not a good movie, but it is interesting because this is like the only time that Marilyn Monroe's like infantile, almost childlike desirability was complicated by perversity and malicious intent. And yeah, that is interesting to see as well. I think that what it does more so, just to add on to what Pauline was saying, is that it complicates her attraction because I think the most attractive part of her was a lot of contradictions because yes, she is childlike, but she's also extremely sultry. Like there's a lot of contradictions that go into Marilyn Monroe's attractive qualities, at least cinematic attractive qualities. But I think that this complicates the immediacy of how the audience view Marilyn. It complicates that by adding mysteriousness and enigmatic qualities to it, so that it kind of frustrates the audience, which I think builds upon the frameworks of the thriller genre, especially as it was known in the 50s. And I think it complicates it in interesting ways. I think that Marilyn does work better in comedies for sure. I don't think there is much mysterious about Marilyn Monroe's screen persona, and that's I think where the aggravation comes from Niagara, because there are no intrinsically enigmatic qualities to her, and you should be able to reach out and touch her, but Niagara is devoted to making sure that she's distanced from you at all times. Even in her death, we are shown her death in obscured angles, at least from far away. It's still beautiful, but she's still distanced even up to her last moments. Those last intimate moments are still distanced. I think she works better when she's immediately available for the audience to interact with. But it is very interesting. It's a nice experiment in the persona of Marilyn Monroe. It is still a very nice experiment, experimenting with her attractive qualities and seeing if mysteriousness can work within the Marilyn Monroe sphere of cinematic vocabularies, and it does work. It does work. It's just the beauty of suffering. I think it's a bit harsher in this film. because parts of her performance lack a certain signature sensitivity that we come to expect from Marilyn Monroe. And I think that sensitivity is integral to a great Monroe picture. You can call it sensitivity childlike if you want, like Pauline Kael did, but I think it's rather necessary. And like I don't care if Pauline Kael wasn't too impressed by Marilyn Monroe. Literally everyone else on the planet was, all the time, and still are. And I'm one of those happy, happy, happy people. It's a very interesting film. First time I watched it, I was so high on morphine in the hospital, so high, and I'm like, am I fucking hallucinating? She looks a lot more beautiful here. I mean, no, I wasn't hallucinating. She looks that good. She really does. It's an interesting picture. I do like that a lot of the times we just vibe with the falls. We just vibe. it, uh, if this film were a vibe check, it would pass. But thank you. Thank you for watching.